right, hour number 2 on a Friday. Chris Brown, Matty Glab with you, and pleased to welcome in now senior producer from NFL Films, Greg Cosell, joining us as he does every week. And Greg Cosell's weekly appearance on One Bills Live is presented by Pepsi. Pepsi is the official soft drink of the Buffalo Bills. Food deserves Pepsi. All right, Greg, we finally reached the postseason.
Yep.
And the Bills, for the first time in 6 seasons, are going to begin their playoff path on the road at Jacksonville, a team that is streaking right now, winners of 8 in a row. I'm curious, how do you look at what many people have talked about, the strength-on-strength matchup with Buffalo's number 1 rushing attack going against a Jaguars' number 1 ranked run defense? I thought it was worth noting that no one has faced fewer rushing attempts than the Jaguars this season because they've gotten up on teams. So I'm wondering how much credence we give to that number 1 run defense ranking. What do you think?
Well, I would say this. I would say with very, very few exceptions, the Bills have essentially run the ball against everybody. I mean, there's not really, I can't remember every specific game, Brownie. Maybe you might know more offhand immediately, but there's really have not been many games where their run game has been shut down. I mean, obviously that's a relative term. Are you going to run for, 180 every week? Of course not. But I don't really recall games where I felt like they couldn't run it at all. I think that the Bills are going to do what they do. And my guess is that they'll have meaningful success. Now you get into the context of a whole game and whether you can stay with the run game, whether, Cook is going to get, 16 carries or 25 carries. Then there's other factors that play into that. But for the most part, they've been able to pretty much run the ball against every opponent, even opponents you didn't. I remember when they played the Chiefs and everybody talked about the fact that, the Chiefs run defense was really good and people didn't think they could run the ball and they ran it really, really well. Nothing tells me that they won't be able to run it based on watching them and watching the Jaguars.
Taking that matchup a step further, where within the Jaguars' run defense will Buffalo have success, and where could the Jaguars limit Buffalo's rushing offense?
Well, again, this was an Aaron Kromer thing, and he's really, really good at designing run games that are specific to opponents. The Bills have been very multiple with their run concepts throughout the season, and they've done different things depending on the opponent. I could be dead wrong on this. Believe me, I'm certainly not Aaron Kromer, nor do I know as much about how to design a run game the way he does. But I've always felt that Devin Lloyd was a very reactive player. I think misdirection elements would get him, being a little overreactive. I think he's a good player, and he's one of those see it trigger guys, and he's a very athletic guy. But I would think that you'd like to get him, messing with his eye discipline a little bit. Aluakon is just a really good player. He's a solid player all around. They're pretty strong. I think they're reasonably strong on the edges, but I would look for them to try to, play with the eye discipline of the second level players and see if that's functional, as opposed to just lining up and saying, here we come. Now, of course, in a run game, you run multiple concepts. It's not just one thing, but that's just something that I would think of watching the Jaguars defense.
Last year, and I understand last year was last year, but the Bills sliced and diced this Jaguars defense, which was under different leadership at that time.
Yeah.
And they were largely a man cover scheme and a lot of blitzing. Now under Campanelli, they're more zone based, but how do you assess the matchups with a different scheme involved, knowing that the personnel on that side of the ball for Jacksonville is largely unchanged with the exception of maybe Newsome?
Well, it's funny you say that because I look back at Jacksonville, and there have been games where they've played a higher percentage of man. Now, I would say that overall, you're right, Brownie, that if you had to say what they are foundationally, you'd say they lean towards zone as their foundation. But there have been
Right.
games this year where they played more man, and that raises the question of whether they might do that against the Bills. Um, of course, if you're going to play man in certain critical situations, you have to feel that you can handle Josh Allen, but they do have athleticism at the second level. Um, I think Campanelli again, I didn't know Buffalo was going to play Jacksonville. Obviously, none of us knew that until last week. But I think he's done a really good job, and I love what he does. I think he's a fascinating mix of almost and I've been trying to think of the best way to describe it. I think he's kind of a fascinating mix of almost like a Vic Fangio scheme where it's aggressive but in a passive type of way in terms of they don't blitz a ton, but then he also has elements of guys that are pressure guys, and there's a lot of dropping out guys underneath from the first level, and that always, not always, but that can pose problems. So I think that he's done a really, really good job. I think it's a tough defense to play against. Um, and your question about man versus zone, I'm fascinated to see how he chooses to go about that because, I think that when you look at the Bills, you probably feel like you can match up to their wide receivers.
In terms of another weapon that could be targeted on the field in Buffalo's offense, the stats say that the Jaguars struggle against tight ends, allowing the sixth most tight end yards
Yeah.
in the league. When watching the Jags film, does that show up on tape, and if so, where?
Yeah, I mean, because they don't necessarily match up, a ton man to man. Although I, and what strikes me as interesting about that, Maddie, is they actually have a safety in Murray who was a corner in college. But so in some ways, because when they play man, he is normally the tight end matchup, not 100%, but normally. So my guess is, without knowing numbers, they're probably hurt more in zone versus tight ends than they are with the times they play man. But it'll be interesting to see because Kincaid, you could certainly make the argument that Kincaid is the best man beater that the Bills have. Um, I think Shakir can win versus man as well, but Kincaid he might be sort of the wild card chess piece in this matchup because he can win and you can move him all around the formation. And they're going to have to be able to throw the ball to some degree, obviously, no matter how well they run it. I would really look to Kincaid, and they played Knox obviously a lot more. Although amazingly enough, they're not a high percentage 12 personnel offense. So I don't know, if they're going to do that in this game, but maybe it makes sense in this game. Maybe try to keep them in their base defense and use both tight ends.
Yeah, it would seem that in certain games where Jacksonville's defense has given up yards and points, it's been against some of the heavier personnel offenses.
Yeah,
The Rams come to mind here, among others. I wouldn't be surprised if the Bills lean into 12 and 13
yeah.
personnel
Well,
offensively.
it's funny. Uh, their zones, and they predominantly played zone. Their zones really got shredded against the Denver Broncos earlier this season. I don't know if you happen to notice that, Brownie, but and they won the game. It was a close game until late, but they won the game. But Knicks threw for a lot of yards. There were a lot of voids in that coverage that day, and I would imagine that the Bills, that Joe Brady and staff have probably taken a good look at that game to see the kinds of things that the Broncos did. Because when I watched that tape, I just thought that there were major voids that could be exploited. And I think the Bills are going to have to be able to do that.
We know Trevor Lawrence has been on a heater as of late with their 8 straight
Yeah.
wins. The offense is averaging 33 points per game over those games. But when looking at the Jaguars' offense at large, where are some of those weaknesses that Buffalo can attack?
Well, I think you have to look at their strengths first. One of the things that has really stood out is, and this is Liam Cohen because he came from McVay and that school of thought. You're seeing a lot of reduced splits. You're seeing Trevor Lawrence working between the numbers better than he ever has in his career. He's been very decisive because he's seeing it clearly with the route concepts. Um, I think that both safeties, Poyer's going, right? He practiced. He's supposed to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
Yeah, so Poyer and Bishop, I think they have to really read the routes and understand the route concepts and combinations well in the game because they have been working so well between the numbers. Since they got Jacoby Myers, he's been real because that's who he is. He's been working really effectively there. So their pass game has been very, very good. And then Lawrence looks like really a different player than he has for much of his career. He's been really decisive. The question is, can they pressure him? Because Lawrence has always had a little bit of a tendency, Maddie, to just and less so now because he's playing with more confidence and comfort, but he does have a tendency at times to speed up when there's pressure. Now the other factor too is, and we're looking at him run right now, is his legs are a factor. I mean, he is, he's not quite Josh, but his legs are a factor. You cannot discount that.
Speaking of, Buffalo's defense and what they've done over the last month and a half, is they have found really good pass rush productivity out of their 3-3-5 nickel package, deploying linebackers as pass rushers. And I don't know that I've seen the same look twice from this defense in like a 4-game stretch. I mean, from the time they had Drake May crossed up and not knowing what he was looking at to Jalen Hurts not knowing what he was looking at, I'm fully expecting that to be deployed in some form or fashion, against Trevor Lawrence and company too. Why are they able to create so much variation out of that personnel grouping?
Because the three linebackers, that extra linebacker is different than a lineman. That linebacker becomes a wild card player. You don't know. It gives them so many more options, Brownie, with what they can do in terms of number one, pressure, and number two, dropping people out as what I've heard Peyton Manning call rat defenders. So it just slows down the quarterback. We saw that. It was very clear with Drake May. Drake May, up until that game in that second half, I mean, it seems like he hadn't been hesitant at all for months prior to that, and then all of a sudden in the second half it just seemed like, and it just takes a millisecond, and if you're late or you don't see it, it doesn't work. So it's just there's so many more things you can do when you've got the 3-3-5. Now obviously you don't have the big guy who's maybe a one-on-one winner as a pass rusher, but it just gives you so much more versatility in what you can do from a pressure and coverage standpoint, particularly with underneath coverage, where the quarterback just might not see a guy dropping out, or maybe he sees him late. So it's been really effective. And one of the things I think Sean's done really, really well over the last month, and a couple of points about their defense. This one I'll make first. I think that they've really made nice adjustments in the second half. Now, whether those adjustments came at halftime or whether they were built into a game plan right from the start, none of us know the answer to that. But I think they've done some really good things in the second half. And the other thing, I think while their run defense has at times been uneven, I think it's been much better when Shaq Thompson plays. And I think Shaq Thompson has really solidified run defense. And, assuming he's good to go and can play meaningful snaps. Because the one thing about the Jaguars is I wouldn't say they're a great running team, but they can be an explosive running team. And the last thing you want, is for them to be the Bills to be in a situation where, ATN breaks off a 50-yard touchdown because he's capable of that. So, and Tootin can run. I mean, they've got guys who can break him off. So, but to me, when Thompson's been in there, they've been a much better run defense.
Yeah, Shaq Thompson was limited this week in practices with a neck injury, but Sean McDermott said he should be good to go for this game. We know that linebacker Trell Bernard will not play in this game, has been ruled out by McDermott. So good to know that Shaq Thompson should be a part of the mix because he's been so good when on the field. We've talked about a lot of different facets of this game, but what is an area that you think is not being talked about a lot or we haven't touched yet that could play a big factor in how this one plays out?
Well, it might be crazy to say, Maddie, but we really haven't talked about the Bills' passing game. And, I think that that's going to have to be a factor in the game. And I don't mean it's just a compliment. And I'm not suggesting that Josh needs to drop back 45 times. That's not my point. But they've had a lot of games this year where they've run the ball exceptionally well, and you guys know, and Josh has not had to throw a lot, and you win, and that's great. And obviously we don't know what the Jaguars offense will do, but my sense is, and Brownie, I assume you would agree. I don't think we're going to be looking at a 13-10 game here, but the point is I think the pass game is going to have to be a factor, and whatever that means. In other words, I guess my point is I don't think they can win this game, with Josh Allen going, 12 for 19 for 125 yards. That would be my
Right.
sense. Could I be dead wrong? Of course, you never know. But I think that the pass game is going to have to be a little more aggressive, a little more assertive, and they're going to have to find ways to get to those voids in the zone coverage and be able to have some intermediate throws and have it be a factor. So that would be my sense. I mean, we always look, Josh Allen is such a great player, and the way this game is talked about, oh, Josh Allen's just going to make Josh Allen plays, and he's capable of that any given time, obviously. But I'm talking about schematics. I think schematically, the pass game is going to have to be able to find those voids and have a sustaining feel to it.
Greg, thanks as always for the time. We appreciate it. Hopefully we're talking about a divisional playoff matchup next week for the Bills. Thanks for the time.
It would be great. It would be great, guys. Hope I'm with you next week. Thanks so much.
All right, take care. That's Greg Cosell joining us as he does every week. Bills Mafia, it's tailgating season, and there's nothing better than Pepsi Zero Sugar to pair with your favorite tailgating food rituals. Before the game, as the great Josh Allen once said, Bills fans deserve Pepsi. Make sure that you stock up for game day. Go Bills.